things that we've learned. I'm also, really excited to take the Q&A and interactive discussion. Again, it's just wonderful to be with this group of like-minded folks. How can we make a bigger and better difference in what we do and in the world around us? I've always been passionate about trying to make a difference, trying to make things better. I grew up in a family where I saw my parents volunteering, giving back. My dad was a physician and always carried a beeper with him. And I saw no matter what we were doing, if patients needed him, he dropped everything and was there. And, that kind of sort of drilled into me at a very early age that, what it was all about was trying to make the world a better place for everybody and trying to figure out things that you could do to make a positive difference. And that's been a thread that's run throughout my life, whether it's for profit or not for profit, as we'll talk about. And, I'm now, this is all confidential, 59 years old. So, not sure, how many more years I have to do all that I can do. But, my commitment is, while I'm still above ground here, to do everything I can to make the world a better place. And with Greenlight, I've definitely found something that is doing that and can do that at much greater scale.
And let me ask you a question that we didn't discuss, but I'm interested to know, do you consider that having a history background and philosophical makes you a better investor?
Not in the sense of the texts that I read or the essays that I wrote or the questions that the professors asked me, but I was very lucky to have a great education, both high school and college and graduate school, and I think it really taught me how to think critically, and then how to think synthetically and try to be creative too. And I think both those elements are important. Sometimes we forget we can kind of be too critical, too analytical, but then not think in a synthetic, creative way about, what can we create? Those are different kinds of thinking. And I think my education, I was lucky enough, they taught me both kinds of things.
Yeah, and definitely, I think in the more of an uncertain world that we have today, being able to think critically definitely helps. So I'm sure it makes you a better investor. So John, now moving on to the Greenlight Fund. Can you tell us more about what the Greenlight Fund does and what's its approach to being able to identify social problems and then finding solutions?
Yes. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to tell you a little bit the Greenlight story, as I also ask Alan to show you a handful of slides. There's probably going to be 5 or 6 slides in total. But just to give you a framework for a second, Greenlight is a nonprofit that we founded about 16 years ago, headquartered in Boston, the Bay Area, and Atlanta in terms of the people that are part of our national staff, all in the U.S., focused on the U.S. at this point, although long-term, there's definitely, potential international expansion. And we're a nonprofit that operates in a very special way at the intersection of government, community, business, and nonprofits. So we really touch the whole ecosystem. And I think that's one of the most important things about this model, and it makes it very translatable cities across the country, but potentially even internationally. So a little bit about why my partner in Greenlight and I, Margaret Hall, created the Greenlight about 16 years ago. And again, what I'm going to talk to you about, it was just an idea 16 years ago. But to frame it, we are now, we've gone from an idea 16 years ago to where we are operating in 10 cities across the US, about to be 13, with a 15-city waiting list. In the course of the next year, we'll reach about 500,000 children and families who are living below the poverty line, impacting them with solutions that drive better outcomes and a change of a whole range of metrics. And we will have brought over 40 solutions that were proven, but we're not in those cities, actually to those cities, to have them succeed and scale. And we will have unlocked by the end of next year close to $250 million of follow-on governmental and other kinds of funding for the things that we brought to cities that otherwise wouldn't be there. So the punchline there is that what was just an idea about 16 years ago has now, grown to a very large enterprise with very large impact across the US. set to eventually impact 3 to 5 million children and families a year in 30 cities as we reach eventual maturity. So, but the founding story for it was I basically realized from my experience on the for-profit world and the not-for-profit world that the things I did in the for-profit world, when they worked, they spread. So I'm an early investor in Airbnb. I'm an early investor in DocuSign. These are just examples of companies that we've been involved in as investors and have spread all over the place, right? All through the US, across Europe, Latin America, et cetera. This is kind of the way things work in the for-profit world, the way our market system works. When you do something that works, it eventually gets everywhere, or if it doesn't get places, some people just knock it off and would have built the Airbnb of another country, et cetera. So that's kind of what happens in the for-profit world, but in the not-for-profit world, it doesn't happen that way. Things don't scale that way. And we could spend hours on why that doesn't happen. But I had been lucky enough to be a social entrepreneur and created organizations, a couple of organizations that have spread, and then also backed organizations that have spread. But in almost all those cases, it was to 5 cities or 6 cities or 7 cities or 8 cities. Even though these were best in class organizations that were totally flipping outcomes at scale and had figured out how to unlock governmental or earned revenue. And so what I realized is I looked at it from a different perspective, a different lens. I looked at it from a city's point of view. And I said, think about a city that we love. Let's say Boston, Massachusetts, my hometown. We have all these things that are moving in an okay direction, but then we have all these gaps and issues that aren't moving. Meantime, there are solutions. The solutions just happen to be in other cities. They're never going to get to our city. And so what if I created this community Swiss Army knife that I would call the Greenlight Fund, that would be a new institution in a community that would look at the community with a different lens, which is what was not just what was there, but what was missing. And basically every year bring one solution that was missing to the city in a community-driven way to address one need or one issue and totally crush the outcomes on that. And I realized if we set up an entity, the Greenlight Fund, to do that would green light one organization a year in each city that we were in 20 years, we could impact 16 issues in a city. And we could really make a huge difference in life outcomes for low-income children and families in a way that wouldn't happen otherwise. And so with that realization, we basically set up the Greenlight Fund. And the way it works, we set up in a city, and I'll come back to it. We raised about a,
just
yeah, go ahead.
To interrupt you, sorry, because that way we can better understand when you talk about, these different solutions. Can you just give us an example of what you mean by solutions?
Yeah. So, and I'll get to that in a second, because I'm actually going to talk about our geographical footprint and the organizations that we brought to different cities. But just as an example is, let's say 1 year in Boston, we focused on outcomes for kids aging out of the foster care system. So each year in Greater Boston, and a whole governmental report came out, there's about 2,000 kids that age out of the foster care system. And within 18 to 24 months, 85% of them are homeless, incarcerated, in contact with the criminal justice system, unemployed, early unwanted parenting, or multiple of the above, costing the government of the state of Massachusetts tens of millions of dollars a year in just incarceration related expenses, that this population was so tragically set on such bad outcomes. And that outcome, those metrics were the same year after year after year after year for the last, let's say, 20 years. So while some things were moving in a positive direction in our community in Boston, this was one metric that was unchanged. Terrible metric year after year after year after year, wasn't going to change, despite the fact that people doing good work around it. And so that year where Greenlight devoted its annual cycle to that issue, we found a solution that had worked in an original city, in this case, Memphis, Tennessee, at scale, and totally flipped outcomes. And flipped outcomes so well that the government was actually paying for it, the state of Tennessee, and it had expanded to 4 or 5 other cities/states where it was hugely successful, but not Boston. It was never going to get to Boston. So Greenlight, as part of our annual cycle, that particular year, we focused on that issue and that outcome that the community wanted us to, and we brought that solution, which is called Youth Villages Life Set, which originated in Memphis, Tennessee, and was proven very successfully. We brought it to Boston. We helped make it happen. We give it a Make It Happen grant, help make it happen in Boston. And 6 years later, that organization is reaching about 1,200 of the 2,000 kids that are aging out every year. And results have flipped from 85% negative outcomes to 85% positive outcomes, saving the government of the state of Massachusetts tens of millions of dollars of incarceration-related expenses every year, which is why the State Department of Children's Services is actually supporting the organization, spending about $4 to $5 million a year on it, which otherwise wouldn't happen. So that thing that I just described is what we do every year in this annual cycle in a community-driven way in every city. And you see it outlined on this slide, this green light method, which is an annual process of once we've set up in a city, looking at what are the issues and metrics that aren't moving in that city. That's the discover part. And then looking all over the country for organizations that work and have worked in an original city and spread to multiple cities, but aren't in our city. And then we bring that model, we select it, and then we give it a make it happen multi-year grant, usually somewhere between 700,000 and $1 million. That's the invest part. And then we make it happen for the community, and then we help it be successful, and then we measure it. And we do that in every city that we operate for one issue a year, every year, year after year after year. So over time, it builds up to a huge footprint. So this is the method on this slide that we follow every year in a community-driven way. Greenlight Atlanta does it for Atlanta. Greenlight Charlotte does it for Charlotte. Greenlight Kansas City does it for Kansas City. Greenlight Boston does it for Boston. So this is what's happening every year in every city. And we're learning as a learning network from everything that's happening. But basically every year we're running this method in every city, attacking one issue a year. And I gave you the microcosm example of that instance where we did it around kids aging out of foster care and have totally flipped an outcome that otherwise wouldn't flip. So if you foot to the next slide, you'll see this is our footprint now, which is, again, we went from an idea where we were doing this in Boston for issue number 1, then in the second year, issue number 2, then issue number 3, to after 8 years, we then set up in Philadelphia and the Bay Area as our next cities. And now our footprint is, we're in 10 cities, about to be 13 with a waiting list of about 15 cities. So what you can see, and we can always send you these slides afterwards, is basically every city, every year that we've been operating, we've addressed some issue that the city was wrestling with. Just to give a quick example, in Philadelphia, Center for Employment Opportunities is all around prison recidivism. And we are impacting prison recidivism for thousands of returning citizens a year, changing recidivism rates from as high as 80% to as low as 10%. Compass Working Capital is an asset building program, helps families in affordable housing. And we've actually generated about $30 million of assets across 5,000 families in Philadelphia that are living in affordable housing that has totally changed their outcomes and actually has enabled them to move out of affordable housing at accelerated rates, which has enabled effectively a 20% increase in affordable housing stock in Philadelphia without building an additional building. Parent-Child Plus is all around early literacy and helping thousands and thousands of kids a year in certain zip codes in Philadelphia show up for kindergarten ready to read at 80 or 90% rates versus the 10% rates prior. Single Stop USA is an organization that works with community college students and has actually improved graduation rates for low income and first generation Black and brown students from about 6% to in the 30% range. Tremendous impact. And Year Up is an employment program, kind of helps kids out of high school basically get apprenticeships and jobs, and serving about 1,000 students a year. And it's all paid for by the corporate community that basically pays for placements, essentially. So there's just an example of, again, in a city, one issue a year with something that works that otherwise wouldn't be there, that changes outcome and changes outcomes at scale. And when you look underneath Boston, just as an example, our longest city, the 13 things we've done in 16 years, they are impacting about 300,000 children and families a year. So this is measurable social change on 13 dimensions that otherwise wouldn't happen. That is at very large scale. And the organizations that we brought as of the end of this year, it'll be well over $100 million that they brought in terms of federal, state, and other funding. Because when we're bringing things that have revenue models that add to the nonprofit pie. This is a very dynamic model that basically adds resources and impact and outcomes every year to every city that we're in. Okay, next slide.
John, a question there,
Yep.
because you emphasized a lot that it's one issue, one solution per year. Why is that? Is it because of resource constraint, or is it because you prefer to have breadth in terms of implementing the solution and really understanding the problem?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, so what we're doing is very hard, right? Because when let's say we set up in Atlanta, we raise a $5 or $6 million fund to make Greenlight Atlanta happen. We hire an executive director. We build a selection advisory council to make sure that we have community nexus. And then we are doing this, annual process every year. That's a very hard thing, right? Because when you're looking, what are the issues Atlanta's wrestling with that it's not solving? Okay, so right there, that's hard. These issues, they haven't been addressed because they're not easy. So that's one thing. Then the second thing is the organizations that we ultimately bring, it's not easy for them to be successful. So if we're doing one a year, we can really rally the community behind it. We can get all the stakeholders, doing everything they need to do. We can get government at the table to make sure the commitments are there. We can get residents at the table to make sure that people are going to take advantage of it. We can get partners at the table to make sure that's going to happen. And then we put all our thrust behind that arrow that year. That means that over time, at scale, 5-7 years down the road, that issue will change. But if we try to do 3 things at the same time, I think we probably wouldn't be effective at any of them. Okay, so the big picture answer is it's very hard to do. You need focus, and you really need to ensure success. Otherwise, you're not going to get success. But if you do focus on one thing a year, what we've proven is you can get success 100% of the time, literally. And so even though we might want to have changed 13 things in 3 years in Boston, the fact that it took us 16 years, yeah, but the important thing is that 13 things have changed and changed at scale. So that's the real reason. The other reason is that it has to be community driven. So if we try to do too many things too fast, it would basically be us or our network or, national at Greenlight, kind of foisting things upon communities. And that's never going to work. So the important thing is to run a cycle in an authentic way to say, what does a community really need that it doesn't have? And if you're doing one of those things a year, you can do it in a community-driven, authentic way to make sure that this is community-driven. If you try to do too many things too fast, it won't be community-driven, it won't work. So those are 2 reasons in answer to your question.
And there's another question on the chat, which they're asking, how do you select the cities where you enter?
Yeah, it's a good question because, again, in the beginning, we had to prove this. But now that we have 16 years of data, and we have, all this outcomes, all this impact, all this acceleration of resources and solutions into communities to totally shift outcomes for low-income children and families on multiple dimensions. We have a waiting list of about 15 cities where people have reached out to us, and there's been millions of dollars soft committed, or mayors or United Ways or foundations or companies, hey, we need you to do a Greenlight Phoenix. We need you to do a Greenlight Seattle. We need you to do a Greenlight Dallas, Greenlight Houston. So we have a waiting list of cities. So how do we choose these cities? Because eventually we want to get to the top 30 MSAs basically in the US, with a couple of exceptions. And we look at cities with criteria. They have to be big enough because we're going to do our work. We want to impact hundreds of thousands of children and families, not tens of thousands. They also have to have bad enough data, meaning the outcomes for low-income children and families and economic and social mobility have to be bad enough. They have to have a civic infrastructure that we could work with, government, business, nonprofits. We have to be able to access data so that we know what the issues are. There has to be a business community that could donate to Greenlight to help make Greenlight happen. So there's about 15 or 20 things that a city has to have in order for Greenlight to consider. The problem is these 15 cities on the waiting list, they all have these issues and these attributes. And so in some ways they would be equally good. So we're going to get to all of them. Then it's a question of the priority of timing. And some of that is urgency. Some of that is relationship oriented, and also the map of Greenlight. So we are doing as our 13th city right now, because you see 10 cities on the map, but Newark will be announced as our 11th city at the end of this year. Chicago, the middle of the next year, will be announced as our 12th, and Denver will be our 13th. So we're going to Denver right now. Why Denver? in particular was, again, it has all the attributes that I just mentioned, that all the cities do, but Denver is an important gateway city, given where it is geographically. We do a fantastic job with Denver. That makes it an easy next hop to like Dallas, Houston, San Antonio, Las Vegas, Phoenix. There's a whole area of the country that Denver is kind of like a gateway to, which makes it strategic to do Denver, because that'll open up then the next cities as growth paths for us. If you can move to the next slide. So an important thing about our model, and I want to kind of wrap this up fairly quickly to take questions, but our model has a fantastic economic model, which is very important. Anytime you want to do something in the nonprofit world, you have to think about what you want to accomplish, how you can accomplish it, but then you really have to think about the economics of it. And I think this is where my cross-sector experience across for-profit and not-for-profit has been helpful. And my thinking about this as a social entrepreneur was, okay, we want to accomplish all this, we got to fund it. How do we fund it? And you think about, what's the value proposition you deliver and who's willing to pay for it? So the way we pay for Greenlight is when we go to a city and we raise a $5 million fund, we have national funders that contribute because they believe in our model, but then we raise the rest of the money locally, getting companies, government, foundations, and families involved. We usually have about 50 people writing checks, average of like 20,000 a year for 5 years. So it's not a huge ticket to be part of Greenlight, but we raise a fund, and that enables us to happen in a city. And what we're telling the people in that city is we raise a $5 million fund, we hire a local executive director, and in 6 years, we can address 5 gaps. That means at the end of 6 years, there's going to be 5 things in the community that weren't moving that are moving, and that are reaching maybe 40, 50,000 children and families a year and scaling. And those things are probably unlocking $10, $12 million a year of governmental money, which is the equivalent as if we set up a $300 million endowment at a 3% or 4% sort of annual spend rate. And we're going to accomplish all that with a 5 or 6 million. And everything that happens in 6 years, those 5 things wouldn't happen without Greenlight. And donors and government, everybody finds that a huge value proposition. So at Greenlight ourselves, what we do is we go and we raise the money, but then the way we spend it is every year in every city, when we bring something, we make a $600,000 to $1 million Make It Happen grant. Once we make that organization happen, like the organization I gave that example of earlier around kids aging out of foster care, we brought it to Boston. We gave it a $700,000 to $800,000 Make It Happen grant. But now that it's been in Boston, it's unlocking about $4 million a year from the State Department of Children's Services, because it's saving the state tens of millions of dollars a year. So we've spent about $600,000 to $800,000, whatever our initial grant was, in multi-year funding. But since then, the state of Massachusetts spent $1 million the first year, $2 million the second, $3 million the third. Now they're spending $4 to $5 million a year. They probably spent like $20 million on it, and they're going to be spending $4 to $5 million every year in perpetuity. So there's massive leverage. And so when we roll this all up, as of today, Greenlight itself has spent about $20 million making 40 things happen in cities. But the leverage, the follow-on funding, has been close to 200 million. And if we roll this clock forward another 5 to 10 years, Greenlight itself will have spent, maybe 50 million, but then the follow-on spending will be 600, 700 million. And so there's massive leverage to what we do, which obviously is very attractive to donors. And having proven this is one of the things that gives this pent-up demand in every city that we're in. So just real quickly, next slide. I just gave this case study, like we're building Denver right now. And right now we don't exist in Denver. It will be our 13th city. But when we go, I kind of explain everything we've talked about before. And I say, hey, if Denver wants us, we can do this for Denver. Let's raise a $5 million fund in Denver to make this happen for Denver. That means Denver has a Greenlight as a community institution, a community Swiss Army knife that's set up to run this annual process year after year after year and address one gap or issue that's not moving. With the fund, we'll hire a local ED, we'll build a local selection advisory council, we'll run an annual process. And in 6 years, 5 things will change in Denver at scale. Join me in making this happen. And my wife and I invest or donate into every city and raise the funds. Since I sent this slide to Alan, we now have lots more commitments, even in the last week, at over 3 million, it's probably about 3.5 million, all these people piling in to help make it happen. And we'll announce a Greenlight Denver next year. So I want to stop the slides, Alan, pull us back together because we can make this more interactive. Hopefully you have a bit of a sense for how Greenlight works, how we make change, and how cities fund it. I do think eventually there's nothing in this model as to why we couldn't set up a Greenlight Delhi or a Greenlight London or a Greenlight Paris, or a Greenlight Sao Paulo or whatever. Like, we have just so much wood to chop in the United States to go from our current 10, soon to be 13 cities to 30 cities. That's kind of like the first phase. But eventually, I definitely am interested in expanding this model internationally. But first things first. And also, I'm hoping that the model itself might inspire some ideas and learnings, right? That somebody sitting in Mexico City might think, based on the learnings and the stuff that Greenlight's done, maybe this is a way I could get involved, or maybe this is a way I could get others involved, or this is a way I could make impact. So what we're doing, we are kind of an open book about it. We publish an annual report every year, both nationally and in each of our cities. And, we're happy to kind of swap thoughts and help people who are thinking about how to make impact in their home city, in their home country, and also how to get donors off the sidelines. I'll just say one more thing before I throw it open for questions, because in the US, we have about 2% of our GDP, or about 2% of income is given on average to charity, which is a big number compared to the UK or other cities. But it's all about growing that pie. There's a ton of capacity with people that have, whether it middle class, whatever, there's so much money on the sidelines for people that have resources, that are interested in impact, but we're not going to grow the pie unless we present them opportunities that are no-brainers for them. The same way people don't invest money in the stock market unless there's a no-brainer opportunity or whatever. Or a lender isn't going to lend unless it's a no-brainer to lend to a house and get a mortgage repaid or whatever. We have to present people with no-brainer opportunities. And I truly believe that's why one of the reasons why Greenlight's been successful is because we're presenting a community with a no-brainer opportunity to donate and get involved. That's why people are getting off the sidelines. And that's what's motivating people to get involved. And so again, that's another lens you can think about if you want to rally people around something. How do you do it? And taking some lessons from the for-profit world to do that by providing a no-brainer return, but that return has to be a social return. Mm-hmm. So I'll stop there and take all kinds of questions. I realize we cover stuff kind of fast, right? This is 16 years of work and an in-depth model that is place adjusted every year, year after year after year. So lots of questions, but I wanted to cover everything kind of in a big picture way and then throw it open for questions, ideas, anything at all.
Sure. So Maria Jose has her hand raised, so I'll give her the space. We also have a lot of questions on the chat, so I'll ask them after Maria Jose.
Thanks, Alan. Hey, thank you, John. This was really, really interesting. I was wondering, you were talking at the beginning about how hard it is to scale social entrepreneurs or social organizations. And I was wondering if you've had experiences where you try to replicate the solution in a new city and it just doesn't work because the reality or the context there is different from where it was originally from, or have you faced that and how do you go around that?
Yeah, so the true answer is these social entrepreneurs that are pioneering, right? So they're coming up with an idea or a program idea and they're proving that in a city. And then after a certain number of years, they're replicating it into a second city and then learning from that and replicating in a third city, maybe failing and learning from that and then replicating to a fourth city. Greenlight comes in after that's all been done, the trial and error and experimentation. Because when we represent a community, let's say, as an example, Kansas City, and we want to do something for Kansas City that's going to dramatically improve mental health for boys and girls in the public school system, because we're going to bring a mental health program that didn't exist in Kansas City, but was pioneered in Chicago and has expanded to 4 or 5 other cities and has proven massive impact and relatively low cost. And we're going to bring it to Kansas City. That's an organization that already scaled and proved its replication model. So when we're bringing it to Kansas City, like we know it's going to be successful because we're not taking very much risk. Kansas City desperately needs it. The superintendent of public schools has come to us saying, this is what I desperately need that I don't have. We're bringing it. The public school system is agreeing to fund it. And then we're giving a Make It Happen grant. So Greenlight operates in a very risk-reduced world because we are letting all these others take the risk and basically prove it. And then every city, every year, what we do is proven. So literally, we've done this 40 times. We haven't had any failures. Now, it doesn't mean we won't. So like at some time, I'm sure we'll have something that doesn't. Now, in general, of the 40 things we've done, probably maybe 80% of them have done way better than we ever would have forecast. Like in Boston, of the 16 things that we've done, 13 are now statewide. We never would have forecast that. But in some cases, they haven't grown as much as we would have thought. So, but we're always learning continuously. Hey, it worked, or it worked even better than, but how do we do it better next time? And so that's really important. This is a learning network. So no matter how successful or medium successful we've been about something, if we ever did it in another city, how can we be more successful, right? That's the power of this network, which gets stronger and stronger with data and learnings. Just shorthand is social entrepreneurs have a lot of trial and error and a lot of failure. And that's what teaches them. Greenlight tries to benefit from that by bringing proven solutions. And that's going to make our success rate kind of well into the 90s.
Thank you, John. Also, if you want to make your questions via chat, please feel free. Also, if you prefer to do them in Spanish, we can.
And I have a question that I posted in the chat. John, very inspiring your conversation. If we want to replicate this model in Latin America, what are the 3 most essential recommendations that you can share with us?
Yeah, I think that the first is, I think one is understanding how it works, because it is a bit of an intricate model that everything's connected. So really understanding how it works and why it works is that's the first thing that's really important. The second thing is, it is making sure, no money, no mission. It is making sure that you have enough money in a city. Like, so one of the reasons why when we go to a city, we raise a $5 million fund, we have enough money to operate for 6 years and bring 5 things. So that enables us to set up this community Swiss Army knife the right way, and then basically let people know every year, come to us with your gaps and metrics, and we're going to address one a year and make it happen. And also for social entrepreneurs to come seek us out. I've got a great solution for X and Y or Z, and I want to come to Greenlight and make it happen anywhere Greenlight has. And we have about 1,000 US nonprofits in our national database now, which is growing because people are coming to us. So without enough money to do this for like 6 years, it wouldn't, so one is have enough money to execute on the mission. That's the second key thing. And the third thing is, make sure that you're doing it in a community driven way. So when we set up, let's say in, just pick an example, in the Bay Area, San Francisco Bay Area, to do this, okay, we had enough money. We understood how it worked. And now what is the issue we're going to address in the Bay Area? We needed to make sure that it was the Bay Area. We were getting all kinds of feedback from mayors, community members, residents, that what was the issue we were addressing and the gap we were addressing was what the Bay Area wanted us to do. That it was really important that it was community driven, basically. So we weren't saying, hey, we know hundreds of amazing things that aren't in the Bay Area, like we could bring any of them, which fits or whatever. So starting with the supply side is the wrong way to do it. It was, okay, what does the Bay Area desperately need that it doesn't have? What's a metric that everybody is consensus around that's really urgent, that isn't moving, where there's a missing puzzle piece that the community really wants? It's really important to start there. And in 6 years, do 5 community-driven things. So those are I'd say the 3 absolute essentials.
It's here, you have your hand raised.
And Alan, just logistics. I'm seeing the questions in the chat, but I'm going to ask you, Alan, as the moderator, like you figure out which questions you want to ask me, and I'll answer anything you put in front of me. I'll try.
Sure, will do.
Thank you, Alan. Thank you, John. It's amazing the work that you have done. And I was wondering exactly what you just said before. How do you choose from all these issues and all these concerns and these gaps that are in a community? How do you choose 5? Because I think it's not easy.
Right. No, exactly. It's not easy. And the real thing, right? We choose 1 a year. So think about it, right? So the way that we do it, and Harvard Business School did a whole case study on Greenlight and how we can make sure it's all locally driven, but yet we make sure that the outcomes are on brand and that one great thing happens a year in each city. Is the first thing is all these decisions are made locally. Now we have national guardrails, that there's national checks and balance at each point to make sure that the annual process is on track. But the way that so the first thing in answer to your question is it's all locally decided. So it is our executive director of Greenlight Philadelphia and the Philadelphia Selection Advisory Council that's deciding which issue and which solution in Philadelphia this year. And then the next year, which issue, which solution in Philadelphia the next year. So that's the first thing. The way that we narrow it down from all these issues and all these potential solutions to one thing that we could do and then do that thing is that we run an annual process. So think about any annual process that you know, like a college admissions process or an annual budgeting cycle or an annual election cycle, to pick something that's not all that functional sometimes. But what's an annual process to deliver an annual outcome? And we run that. So that Greenlight method that was in the first slide that Alan showed you, we run that. And the way we run it through time is basically for the first 3 months, our executive director and selection advisory council are open to buy. What are the issues or metrics that community want us to change? So anybody can come to us, a resident living in poverty, a pastor or a reverend, a church leader, a head of a community foundation, head of United Way, the mayor, the head of the public school system. And they basically, people come to us the first 3 months and say, but it has to be a metric. It has to be measurable. Here's a metric that's bad, unchanged. We want it to change. And we're at the table. And if Greenlight could bring something that could change, because unless something new happens, it's not changing, we'd be all in on it. Okay. So basically we get 20 people coming to us from the community on average every year with a metric and an issue that is there, not changing. By month 3, at the end of month 3, our ED, our executive director and selection advisory council, they have to figure out of those 20, which 3 are we going to look at? They have to do it. How they do it, it's usually urgency, priority. And it doesn't mean the other 17 things we won't ever get to. Maybe we'll get to that one of those 17 things next year, but you have to do it. If you're going to run an annual process, you got to get down to 3 issue areas. So by month 3, they're down to 3 issue areas. Now by month 6, for these 3 issue areas, here's 4 things that have worked in another city at scale and expanded to 4 or 5 cities, but they aren't in our city yet. Because if they were in our city, the results would be different. So now by mid-year, we're down to 3 issues we could attack and maybe 3 organizations for each of them. So there's 9 possibilities. So we've come down by mid-year from a vast universe of issues and opportunities to 9 things we could do. And the back half of the year, we're narrowing that down to 2 finalists. And the principal way they get narrowed down is, okay, if we could bring Youth Village's Life Set to Boston to change outcomes for kids aging out of foster care, but we need to make sure the State Department of Children's Services will refer kids as they age out. If they won't refer kids when they age out, we can't do this program. And we need to align them. They're going to refer 100 the first year, 300 the second year, 500, eventually 1,200 a year. Because if they don't do that, we're not going to bring it. So in each of those 9 semifinalists, we're doing that work to see, is it really ready to happen that year? Like, can we get all the stakeholders aligned? If we need federal money, can we get the feds to agree? Like one year we brought something to Cincinnati that the US federal government agreed to commit a minimum of $10 million to. Obviously we couldn't do that if they didn't commit it. So we're in the back half of the year, we're working to work our way down to the 2 things that would be like no-brainers, massive successes, the best things, the best urgent. And then we only choose 1. And the one that we choose, we're going to get behind and make it happen. Now, the finalist that doesn't get chosen, we might decide to choose it in the next year and just short cycle the process. But that's how we go. The way we go is it's mechanically, right? Because if we didn't do that, nothing would happen. And we go from all these needs and all these opportunities to one thing that's going to happen every year. And again, in 16 years in Boston, by making 13 things happen, we can make a ton of change happen. But you have to have the discipline to do one thing a year and actually do it and run a process to do it.
John, I'm looking at the questions. They're all basically related to your approach and all those different steps. And so I'll go throughout. I'll ask the questions in order of the approach. And one which Jose Diaz is asking is about fundraising, which is basically the first approach, right? And his question is really about understanding how is it that you're able to raise funds without already having the solution. And
Yep.
I'll ask a question as well related to that, which is also based on that, because usually you have, as an entrepreneur, you have to have a solution, you have to have a business idea, a model, and then come to the investor and demonstrate that it's going to work. Here you're already asking people, believe in our model. We don't have already a solution. We don't even know what the problem is. So how do you do it? And what recommendations can you give people about fundraising, how to best approach fundraising?
Okay, so it's a little bit native for me because remember, and Alan described my background, I was an entrepreneur who built and created my company, but then once I sold it, I became a venture capitalist. So in venture capital, what you do, and that is my day job, I'm still a venture capitalist, but with my partner's permission, I've shrunk my time down on business to half time so I can spend half time on Greenlight. And but in that half time I spent on business, basically as venture capitalists, we raise funds. So my firm, we're investing our 9th fund, which was a couple $100 million fund. So investors give us the money. And then we say, okay, in the next 5 years, we're going to invest in 20 startups. And our model is that some of those startups won't do very well. And then some will become like Airbnb, a DocuSign. And hopefully the 200 million people invest will eventually be worth 600, 800 million. But that's because a third of the companies won't work out, a third will work out well, and then 40% will work out extremely well. And that's our model. And now it does help that we've proven that model in multiple funds. But at any rate, we're raising funds before people, and they don't know what we're going to invest in. They have no idea. We don't know either because we don't know when an Airbnb is going to come along, or when a Stripe is going to come along, or a DocuSign, or a Warby Parker, or an Uber, or whatever. We just know where we think there's going to be change in the economy and where we're looking for entrepreneurs, but who's going to come along and who we're going to invest in, we don't know, but they're trusting us to do a good job. So I kind of felt intuitively that I could do the same thing in the nonprofit world. Like we could raise a fund, not massive amounts of money, right? In a given city, we're raising like $5 million. And we could get people to trust us that in 6 years, we could do 5 great things. And then I kind of modeled that out. I said, like, okay, if in 6 years we do 5 great things, what do those things look like in year 6? We're changing metric X from A to B, metric Y from, G to F, metric, Z from, Q to R. And we're operating at scale because we brought things that are really successful. And in 6 years, with these 5 metrics that are changing that otherwise wouldn't change, we could be reaching 30, 40, 50,000 children and families a year and unlocking lots and lots of governmental and follow-on funding. That has to be a good thing. Now, then I was also willing to donate my own money. So when I raise a fund in a city, my wife and I, we donate $250,000. So we're donating ourselves, which helps because I'm saying like, I know this is going to work. I know in my bones, this is in the early days, I know in my bones this is going to work. We're willing to donate our money. Like it's going to create huge impact. If we don't do something like this, these things won't change. If we do stuff like this, it will change. Take a leap of faith with me. And I'm going to report the results every year. And you get a lot of no's when you do that, right? Like people will say, well, that's great. Come back to me when you're raising your next fund, because I want to see how this does. And you maybe have to ask 3 people for every one that comes in, but then you get it done. And now you get to execute. So that's kind of on the fundraising side. Now, it does get progressively easier. So when we're going to Denver now, which we showed you that slide, that's $3.5 million that's been committed in like 120 days Because what happens is now we're speaking to a model that, yeah, of course, we still don't know what we're going to do in Denver, but the model has been so successful in our other 10, soon to be 12 cities, that it's looked at as a no-brainer for people in Denver. And so that's the other thing. Sometimes people will, well, I don't want to get started raising the money, because if I raise the money and I do something great, I'm still not operating at great scale. So, but then I have to do this in all these other cities. Like, it's going to be too hard. Well, it's like climbing a rock wall. Like, once you get the first toehold, then the next rock can be easy. And then it kind of gets easier and easier. So if I was saying, if I looked at this as a mountain and said, just to use a slightly different analogy, but adjacent, geez, I want to help cities across the country. That's too hard to lift. That's impossible. But I broke it down in, like, I want to help Boston. And if I help Boston improve the model, I can then do the next couple cities. If I prove the model in the next couple cities, I can eventually do this in every city. So we've now raised $80 million plus in all these cities across the country. And we've raised follow-on funds. Like in the Bay Area, we're now raising our third fund. The second fund, we had 20x the donors that committed to the first fund. In the third fund, we'll have more donors still, but the average donor so far is committing 3x what they committed to the second fund. So again, if you kind of think, how do I get all the way to the mountaintop in the beginning, you may never go. But if you kind of break it down into achievable phases, over time, you can, with patience and persistence, you can do something great, right?
Thank you, John. So we talked a little bit about your model. We talked about the initial round of fundraising, being able to have enough money to implement 6 solutions in a 6-year timeframe, more or less. We talked a little bit about how you prioritize the problems with the community. The next step of your model is about really identifying those solutions across America. Could you tell us about how you approach that?
Yes. So again, that has phases too. So in the first phase, when we set up in Boston and we said, okay, the first year we wanted to do something for at-risk kids, statistically at-risk kids, who, when you look at their family situation, they're about 90% likely to end up in the criminal justice system. And we can kind of identify that. And could we bring something that would change life outcomes, get them to actually graduate high school at very high rates and have no contact with the criminal justice system? And so we looked at that issue, and Greenlight was at the time an unknown. And then we basically did 2 things. One is we looked at literature, we looked at publications, stuff you could find on the web, who was doing great work in that area and had expanded to multiple cities. So that was the first way. Second way is we actually talked to funders. So there were some funders like the Gates Foundation or the Ford Foundation that specialized in this, had program officers, and we talked to program officers and said, what do you fund that you think is world-class, that should be everywhere, but it's probably only in 5 or 6 cities? And they gave us a list. And then we did our own digging, and we found maybe 20 or 30 organizations that could be a fit. And then we kind of looked at their filings and everything. And then we went and called 5 of them. And we said, we're trying to address this problem in Boston. We know you're successful in your original city plus 4 others. If it made sense and we could bring you to Boston, would you be willing to come? And then we had a universe and we did 1. So that was how we did it in the early days, right? It was basically by reaching out on a particular issue to experts, social entrepreneurs that were known, and directly saying, we could do this, we could make it happen. So that's the way we did it. Now what's happened, fast forward 16 years, by doing this every year in every city around all these issues, we have a national database of about 1,000 social entrepreneurs, coded by like asset building or affordable housing or homelessness or food insecurity or kindergarten reading readiness or, college graduation or workforce development and employment and upskilling. But that's growing by hundreds per year, because if you're a social entrepreneur and you're really good, right, you're proving your model, you're proving it in a 2nd or 3rd city. And then you're coming to Greenlight because you're saying, I want to be in all the Greenlight cities, which is the beauty of building this network. So now is a totally different story. Our inventory of solutions is growing by hundreds per year organically. But again, that wasn't the case in the beginning. We had to go seek it. And now, in addition to all that, we have like annual meetings or, with let's say like New Profit or Blue Meridian or the Ford Foundation, what are you seeing that's new? What are you seeing that works? What are you backing up the truck for nationally? Who do you think's amazing? You know, and just making sure that we're adding, right? And then every year, every city, we're looking at a particular issue. We can look at our national database. We can look at the things we've done, and we can also talk to co-funders, and we can basically get a universe. There's no shortage of this. Like our last cycle in Atlanta, where we chose something around, it's a very clever kind of 2-generation model that basically trains Black men to be teachers and has them teaching pre-K in the Atlanta and greater Atlanta public school system, so that we can build a pipeline of Black teachers in Atlanta, which is sorely lacking, but also that we can get thousands and thousands of kids ready to read in kindergarten, which otherwise isn't happening. And it's a partnership with the public school system. So that selection cycle, we probably looked at like 60 things. So there's no shortage of amazing programs that are needed in cities that aren't in cities. Again, the big thing is doing it community driven. And again, every year, the program that we choose, all the data and outcomes from that year after year after year get into our database. But then the things that we don't choose get into our database too. So it just grows and grows and grows. And again, that's one of the benefits of doing a network, right? Because if we're operating in multiple cities, social entrepreneurs are going to come find us because they're going to want to be in many of our cities. If we're only in one city, I don't know, social entrepreneurs might not be as motivated, right?
Thank you, John. We have one time for one last question. I'm not sure if anybody else wants to ask a question. Please feel free to ask it on the chat or open your mic. Also in Spanish, if you prefer to do it in Spanish, and I'll gladly translate. Well, doesn't seem to be another question. So I'll ask the last question and before we say goodbye, but wanted to know about impact and how you measure and manage impact.
Yep. So the one thing about our model is it's easy to measure impact because remember, every year in every city, we're starting with a metric. So that's a measurable thing. Like for instance, 1 year in the Bay Area, we did something around digital divide. And we looked at, there's about 30% of families in the Bay Area that are living in poverty, and about 40% of them do not have broadband internet access. And there's a serious digital divide. And so the basic metric was for thousands and thousands and thousands per year, could we get them connected on broadband, low cost or free broadband, and could we get them trained to use it so that we were impacting digital divide for, let's say, 4,000 to 5,000 families a year? Clear metric. And then we bring something called Everyone On that originated in, I think, New York City and spread to a handful of cities and had shown it could do that. And we brought it to the Bay Area. We gave it funding with the whole 5-year plan, how it was going to scale, how revenues were going to scale, expenses were going to, and then we're going to, every year and every quarter, we're going to measure how are they doing. And the forecast of how they're doing is based on what they've already done. So there's nothing unachievable in that. But if they would ever slip or not quite do, we would let them know, hey, you're messing up here. Like, we're not having the impact that we want. And if you ever want to get to more green light cities, like, you got to fix this, and they'll fix it. And so then we track the outcomes. And then we report on those outcomes every year. So one of the things I'll do as a follow-up, we just came out with our annual impact report, which we publish every year. It's our national annual impact report. And we publish it every year, which covers in every city, everything that we do and all the KPIs or key metrics. And then we also publish an individual city one every year for every city. So people can see, okay, here's the issues green lights attacked. Here was the bad metrics they sought. And then here's the new metrics that they're delivering. So, because we specialize in the measurable. So for us, metrics are easy. One caveat is, like, that's just a piece of what we need to do in the nonprofit world. There's all these amazing people doing amazing things that you can't measure. And that's really important and great. And we need that. So Greenlight isn't a substitute for anything. Greenlight is an additional change layer to, in every city, every year, in a measurable way, change one measurable thing that's not happening. So we specialize in the measurable universe. We're all additive. And again, in 50 years, we can do 40 things that change outcomes, around 40 issues. And we can measure all those, and we can report on all those, and we should, and we do. But that's the measurable universe. There's all kinds of other things that are important to do too, right? Greenlight's complementary. But I will send Alan, you and Carolina and Paul, I'll send you guys our annual impact report that you can circulate. And that's kind of how we track impact and how we measure it. And just before we close, Paul, anything, we'll ask one last question. Obviously people have to go, they have to go, but Paul, give you the last, because Paul is obviously involved in Latimpacto and is also a Greenlight National Board member, been amazing value add to me and the whole network. And since he knows Greenlight really well, and he knows you guys pretty well, just one little question you think, we don't want to go too far over, but do you think we should talk about, we haven't talked about yet?
The one thing that occurs to me is, and I'll, at the risk of changing the subject somewhat, but I'm referencing the discussions that we had early on, Carolina and Alan, when I know you're sorting out what you wanted to do with this series, and one of the questions that was on your mind was equity. And so one of the things you were looking for in a speaker from the US is someone who was dealing with that issue. And I happen to know that Greenlight is. So John, I would just invite you to touch on that. Perhaps Carolina, you or Alan would want to actually frame a particular question in that category. Or
I could just speak to it. I could just speak to it. So basically, as you know, right, in the US, we have huge equity issues. There's huge, inequities and disparities in income. We also have huge, inequities in race and, the way historical racism sort of impacts systems in the United States. We're not alone in that, but we have huge issues in the society. So there's many threads to how Greenlight relates to that. But the big thing about Greenlight is there's a lot of people talk about stuff, which is a great first step, but they don't actually do anything. Like with Greenlight, this is sort of baked into our model in so many ways. So just to highlight a few of them, right? Where does it begin every city, every year? With community and resident need. So we are starting our process with those in poverty, those experiencing poverty. Typically, there's an 80 to 90% likelihood that they will be Black and brown and of color in our cities that we're in. And they're actually at the heart of, from the very beginning. So instead of top-down grant making, this is the reverse of it, which is what does the community need? Our executive director, because we get to hire we raise the fund, we hire, our executive director is usually a person of color, but they look and feel like the community that they're from. So it's about 80 to 90% of our EDs are people of color. And then our selection advisory council that we build, who helps the ED as we run this annual cycle, usually that's majority person of color. So we get to architect this from scratch, right? In an equity driven way that's at the very heart of everything that we do. Then what happens is every year we are actually addressing an issue that low income children and families, mostly Black and brown, have and want change. And so we're providing a vehicle for change. So Darren Walker, who's the president of the Ford Foundation, is a national backer of Greenlight. He's like, Greenlight is systems change because you're providing communities an avenue to make change as opposed to imposing stuff. You're giving people a voice. So this is baked into everything that we do right from the get-go, okay? And then what happens 16 years down the road in Boston, as an example, right? 13 things have changed that low-income children and families, mostly Black and brown, wanted to change, but were not being heard. And now things are changing, okay? But then the organizations that we brought, those solutions that we brought, of those 13 organizations, I think 10 or 11 are run by leaders of color. So because we're creating something new, right? We can create new leaders in the community. And those organizations, which we brought, that are unlocking about $30 million a year of state, federal, and other kinds of earned revenue funding, right? Remember, we unlocked that funding. So these organizations which are doing good work, impacting 300,000 children and families a year, this is just one city. These 13 leaders, mostly leaders of color, are employing about 300 people. Most of those people are people of color. Okay, and then the 300,000 children and families that they're impacting, we actually have the data on that, which looks kind of like what you would think it would look like in Boston, which is about 40% of the residents that we serve with our organizations are Black, 40% are Hispanic, 10%, 12% are white, and then 8% are other. And so this is a model, right, that is equity in action. Not that we can't improve everything that we're doing all the time, right? Continuous improvement. But again, what I would say about equity, like my message about equity would be, think about it, bake it into your model, but do it. Make sure that it's not words, but you're actually doing it and have a ton to show for it. Otherwise, you can just rethink what you're doing and do something different or do it better or whatever. But, talking about equity without doing it, that's our biggest affliction right now. I mean, not when we weren't talking about it before, now we're at least talking about it, but there's a huge gulf between talking about it and doing something about it.
Thank you, John. It's quite an interesting model. Before this presentation, when we first talked, when you look at the webpage, it seems to be a very complicated model when you talk about funding and fundraising and your approach. But then when you go into the details at the end of the day, it's very, very simple and lean. No, it's really about ensuring enough resources, and it's not really that much because you talked about 5 to 6 million, so it's more or less 100,000 per issue. $100,000 per issue. So it looks very reachable. You talk about focusing on one issue per year, which is also very manageable. And you talked also about really understanding the needs of the communities and with them really understand what outcomes are not really being changed and saying, okay, we need to do things differently to have a different outcome. And I think that's also connected to impact because you're first starting and understanding what's really activities that are not having an outcome and what I can do to change and have a more positive outcome. And then after being able to understand that from the community, from the problem solving side of it, it's very easy then to find what is the indicator you want to measure. So it seems to be very simple, very clear, and I congratulate you for that. And thank you very much for your generosity and for being able to be here today and explain that model and for your time as well. So thank you very much, John. And we're very happy to have you, and hopefully we'll have you in more occasions as well.
Great. Well, thank you guys for all you do. Thanks for making the time for me today.
Thank you, John.
As I said, I'll send our annual impact report, and happy to kind of help people think about stuff. And
thank you, John. You are also
stimulate some
welcome
thought.
to our annual conference that we will hold in April 25th and 27th. So please join us, and all of you that are today with us, please join us for our conference in Cartagena, Colombia, April 25th.
Okay.
Thank you. Thank you. Very
Ciao.
inspiring
Goodbye.
conversation. Ciao, ciao.
Okay.
Thank you,
Bye-bye.
everybody, for joining us
Bye.
here today.
Thanks, John.